There's nothing like being in the stands cheering on your favorite team. Game Time is your hack to unlocking amazing tickets in just a few taps. Plus, their Game Time guarantee means you can trust you'll get 100% authentic tickets at the best price. Fees are always included, so what you see is what you pay. Get the best deals on sports tickets. Download the Game Time app and create an account to start searching for tickets to upcoming games and events. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Game Time.
Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Welcome to episode 96 of Sports Management Podcast. This episode is sponsored by InSport Education, the online business school for sport. InSport Education is offering Sports Management Podcast listeners 10% off all of their courses with the code Sports Management Podcast 10. Click the link in the description below and elevate your sports business career today. Now, today's guest is Paul McVeigh, a former Premier League player and international footballer who is currently working as a performance psychologist after getting his master's degree in sports psychology. He's also the author of the book The Stupid Footballer is Dead and a keynote speaker. In this episode, we spoke about what it takes to be a professional footballer, the importance of a sports psychologist, Ronaldo versus Messi, how Tony Robbins' book changed Paul's life, becoming a keynote speaker, why he started doing yoga at age 17, and much more. Paul McVeigh, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Marcus. How are you doing?
I am great. I'm very excited to talk to you today. How are you yourself?
Yeah, going well. It's been a pretty busy time. Things have kind of exponentially gone through the roof in the last few months, last year or two. And so, yeah, it's just been a really, really busy time. And ironically, coming up to kind of this Easter break, which when I was playing a number of years ago, that used to be probably one of the busiest times. And fortunately, I can put my feet up over the Easter holidays now and have a nice relaxing time instead.
That sounds good. You have deserved it. You have a lot on your plate, which we will discuss, of course, in this episode. So for those who might not know who you are a former footballer, international footballer from Northern Ireland. And right now you are a performance psychologist. You got a master's degree in sports psychology in 2017. So if we start with what you're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say probably the simplest way to describe it is I generally go and travel the world, which again is an amazing byproduct of the work that I do. And I'm able to go in and deliver, whether it's one-off keynote speeches or whether I'm delivering long-term leadership programs with our team and going in to try and work with, generally it's the senior leadership team normally of a multinational organization, and work on developing them in terms of their own performance, in terms of their own leadership, and also in terms of the bigger team that they work in. So yeah, I feel really blessed to have this role. I can't even really call it a job because it doesn't feel like a job, and it's even when I think about when I was younger and getting paid to kick a ball around the field and getting paid to do that, and now I get paid to go in and talk about kicking a ball around the field. And as my mum says, when are you going to get a real job? But I've got the 45 and it still hasn't happened yet. So I'm going to see how long I can play this for.
So that is so interesting. And you are, I think, the first footballer to take a master's degree in sports psychology, which, as I mentioned, you did in 2017. Where does the interest for the sports psychology come in for you?
Well, it's interesting because it feels like the fact that, as I mentioned, I'm 45 and it feels like I've just had this in my life my entire time of being on this earth. But actually, it's not true, because the first 16 years when I was growing up in Belfast in Ireland, and if you know anything about history in those times, there was a lot of civil unrest. It's called the Troubles because of all of the issues that were happening. So I grew up in an era in the 70s and 80s and 90s in Belfast where There was lots of bombs going off. There were lots of killings. There was lots of, troubles, tanks, soldiers, all sorts of things happening in my own streets and neighborhood. And so I probably didn't have this mindset of, how to be the best, how to get the most out of yourself, how to continually learn and develop. And it was only whenever I came across the Tottenham Hotspur in 1994, and I remember as a 16-year-old kid joining the youth team, that I actually felt really inferior to all of the other players. And I think that was just because I had a different accent, which was kind of weird because I'd always had this accent, but suddenly when I was around these London lads who just seemed more confident, a little bit more brash and flash and showy, and I just didn't have that. So I felt really inferior. And it probably stayed with me for at least a year until I read a book, and this book just completely changed my life. And it wasn't like I went out and sought this book out and thought I needed to change my mindset. I didn't realize that my mindset was actually holding me back. But anyway, my friend gave me a book, and it was by a guy called Tony Robbins, Anthony Robbins, who's a big personal development guru in America, still going really strong after 40 years of the work he's done. And I remember reading this book, and it was almost like the blinkers just came off in terms of I realized that the way that I was thinking about things was really unhelpful, was really ineffective and almost quite destructive. And I thought, actually, if I can start applying some of the concepts, some of the practical tools of this book, simple things like goal setting, visualization, affirmations. And once I started to understand that it was me, and it was me that was holding myself back, and if I could then develop this going through my career, I thought it would give me the best chance to be successful. And so I did that, and for nearly 20 years, it was something that was just all the way through my playing side. And so when I came out of professional football, it was just such a natural progression to go into this world of mindset psychology, which then has allowed me to go in and share this in the corporate world.
Wow, that's an incredible story. So taking your master's degree, was it obvious that you wanted to take those learnings and give it back to football? Because a lot of you have written a book also, The Stupid Footballer is Dead. So was it natural for you to give back the knowledge that you have gained to football?
Yeah, I thought it was really a very natural progression, because whenever I was coming out of my playing days of football, I thought that I built up some sort of level of expertise or experience or this knowledge base. And ironically, I didn't start working on football straight away. So we had a sports psychologist, a guy called Gavin Drake, who's been one of my mentors for nearly 20 years now. And as Gavin came in and worked with us at Norwich City when we had actually just been relegated from the Premier League. So Gavin came in, worked with the team, and then because I stayed in touch with him, and then whenever I finished my playing days, he said, why don't you come and work with me? Because he had this corporate training business, working with clients all over the world. And so I initially had nothing to do with football and started working in the corporate world. But then as I'm delivering, 2, 3, 4-day programs to law firms and accountancy firms and to, financial services firms, and I thought, why am I not doing this in football? So then I decided to start working in the footballing world again. And so then that's when I started working with a couple of Premier League clubs for the next 7 years. And that's really where the master's degree came from, because for each year after 2010, when I realized the credibility I might have built up from playing professionally, with each year that passed, it was probably just eroding and slipping away. And it almost culminated when I was doing a session with some of the Crystal Palace lads. And it was actually Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who started at Crystal Palace before he moved to Manchester United for 50 million. And I remember doing a session, and I was talking about Roy Keane, the kind of like the unbelievable player from Manchester United. And I was saying, one of those all-round midfield players, like a Roy Keane who gets into the box, scores goals, comes back to defence, can dictate possession, can pass the ball. And Aaron Wan-Bissaka put his hand up and said, Paul, who's Roy Keane? And at that point, I thought, wow, if they don't know who Roy Keane is, they clearly don't know who I am from a footballing perspective. And that's where I thought I need to start trying to get some sort of academic credibility to add to the experiential learning I had from stepping onto a Premier League pitch.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point that you said, that the players nowadays might not be aware of, what happened in football 10, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So talking about that from a sports psychology perspective, My assumption is that in 1994, 95, when you started with Tottenham, this was not as, call it normal, as it is today to have a sports psychologist. Nowadays, I would assume that all elite clubs has one. Maybe I'm wrong, but what is your vision on that?
Well, I don't want to say that you are wrong. I would just say, in my experience, I don't think it's the norm.
Okay.
I would say that from when I started playing in 1994, it was interesting because after I'd made my debut for Spurs against Aston Villa in 1997, so very fortunately played against the likes of Gareth Southgate, who's obviously now the current England manager. Dwight York was up front. And so, it was a really, really good time for me, but I'd already got to the point in my mind of how do I improve? If I've just made my debut, how do I improve on this going forward? So I decided I'd love to try and see a sports psychologist, not because my career's going downhill, but how do I keep improving and get better? That wasn't the norm because no one else was doing it, or Tottenham Hotspur back in the day. And so going back to the question of how normal is it today? Well, the reason why I don't work in football and the reason why I left Crystal Palace in 2017 was because the challenges that I had every single time there was a change in itinerary or a change of the timetable, it was the sports psychology session that seemed to get bumped, which meant, in my opinion, it's still very low down on their list of priorities. So I don't know if all the Premier League teams, and even if you just think that's the Premier League teams, what about all the teams below the Premier League teams? Do they have access to sports psychologists? So I don't think it's that normal. And I do think that it's still the single biggest area that players can improve their performance in.
I would agree with that. So then the natural question is, why do you think that not more clubs have a sports psychologist?
Good question. I think because it's very, very challenging to measure it, to see the results from it, to see if it actually makes a difference. I think it's interesting. I had a conversation recently with a really senior, very experienced sports scientist. And that's another one where I think whenever I came to Spurs in 1994, our entire staff was consisted of a coach, a physio, and a kit man. When I left professional football in 2017, just for the academy at Crystal Palace, we had 2 coaches, 2 physios, a doctor, a masseur, a nutritionist, a sports psychologist. The kit man, it went an analyst. There was about 15 of us just for working for the academy. And you think, well, how does that compare to the first team? So I think the difference is with sports science. Whenever we got our first sports scientist at Spurs in 1996, which was about the era when most clubs started to employ sports scientists, they could very quickly go, right, this is how fast you can run 50 yards or 50 meters. This is how much you can lift. This is how high you can jump. Let's do this training program. Let's retest you. Oh, wow, you can do it higher, faster, quicker, stronger. So it's very simple to be able to measure improvement from a sports science strength and conditioning point of view. But if you ask someone, how do you measure your resilience? How do you measure leadership? How do you measure an understanding of what's going on in your game mentality? It's all incredibly difficult to do. And people are trying to find ways, but probably most people would agree that no one's really cracked it. And so that's the other side, that if one person's going to work as a sports psychologist, then they're going to come in with their own view of the world, their own idea, their own experience, their own knowledge base, which will be very different from someone else, which is very different from someone else as another sports psychologist practitioner. So that's probably the biggest reason why it hasn't really stuck yet. The only thing I would argue is that if you're not using it, then you're not trying to pick out those extra, any 1%, 2%, 5%. In my opinion, it's probably 90% improvement in your performance that it could be if you consistently worked on your mental performance.
Exactly. And in elite sports, that's what you're looking for, right? You want that extra 1% can make a difference between winning the cup or not winning. So obviously this is one of a very important pillar in the whole ecosystem of the team.
Well, Marcus, I'll throw this at you. One of the things that I talk about whenever I'm going in to deliver a keynote for any of these global organizations, generally, just because I know I'm not high profile, and even though I played, in the Premier League and played against the Liverpool and Chelsea and Arsenal and Manchester United, etc., one example that I use is because I was fortunate to score against Manchester United at Old Trafford in the Premier League, and because we played against Cristiano Ronaldo, who was in his first year at Manchester United, I use him as a great example. And I say, well, whenever he was in his first year at Manchester United, do you think he was anywhere near the best player in the world? Because clearly for the last 10, 15 years, he has been right at the pinnacle. It doesn't matter whether you think it's Messi or Ronaldo. They've both been amazing. He's right at the very top. But if you go back to when I played against him in 2004, not only was he not even in the top 2, he wasn't in the top 10. He probably wasn't even in the top 10 best players at Manchester United in 2004 because they had Wayne Rooney at the time was performing in a better way. You had Paul Scholes, Roy Keane, Rio Ferdinand. So when I think about it, how does someone like a Cristiano Ronaldo go from, let's say he was a really good young player with lots of potential, but nowhere near a top performer. And pretty much from 2006-07, he just went through the roof, scoring 30, 40 goals a season, and then consistently scored an amazing amount of goals for the rest of his career. And my question always is, so how does someone like Cristiano Ronaldo go from this level down here to this level consistently for 15 years? And I'm not turning this into any kind of session or workshop, but I'll tell you that generally the answers I'll get, people will say, it's to do with his belief. It's to do with his confidence, his drive, his dedication, his application, his learning from the coaches around him, is all of these things that people think is because he wants to be the best player in the world. And even that is a separate story. It's really interesting because I'm fortunate to know a few people who know Rio Ferdinand, and Rio Ferdinand tells that story about how Cristiano Ronaldo, just as a young kid, an 18-year-old kid, wanted to be the best player in the world. So if you think of all the reasons why he became the best player in the world, dedication, drive, belief, confidence, all these things, ultimately where are they all taking place? And if you realize that every single thing that he's working on that's got him from this level of being a good young player to being the very best in the world is simply down to his mindset.
Yeah.
And I just think, well, if it works for Cristiano Ronaldo to become the best player in the world, why would every other player on the planet not want to be exploring and maximizing this as much as possible? So ultimately, I don't understand why the coaches, why the clubs aren't investing heavily, if not massively, in this area. Because for me, everything else is pretty much the same. Technically, the players are the same. You know, physically, they're all incredible athletes. The biggest variation in performance always comes back to mindset.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's not so, controversial, because you said when you ask that question, you say it's mindset, it's the drive. Maybe it's that you don't need a professional for that. Is that where it comes in, or you don't want to spend the money on that because they should have that drive themselves, or somewhere along those lines?
It's like why they bring in, a nutritionist. Everybody knows what they should eat, but why do they have professionals who work in the area of nutrition with sports clubs and elite athletes? Because it's all about those little tiny margins that are going to make the difference between just about winning or not winning at all. And this is why I'm still, pretty bemused really why there's not much more money being invested into the clubs. Because if you have, let's say, someone like a Paul Pogba, £100 million asset, and someone isn't working on it, I don't know if there are or not, if people are working on him with his psychology, but unless he had someone as a dedicated sports psychologist, because it's £100 million, and if he doesn't perform, it's £100 million down the drain. But let's be honest, did he perform at his best at Manchester United? Probably not. Was it down to his athletic ability? No, because he's a pretty amazing athlete. Is it down to his technical ability? No, because he won the World Cup while he was still at Manchester United. What else is the reason why he didn't perform? So for me, it's such a simple answer.
Yeah, and of course with Ronaldo there, he obviously has an incredible mindset, but also he's not in a terrible physical shape as well. So, to be the best in the world, you need to have all of these aspects.
You do have to, but again, I would argue lots of these players are going into the gym, and yes, they're all pretty much amazing athletes. So if you look at Cristiano Ronaldo, does he have a better physique than Mo Salah or Harry Kane or even, even Harry Winks? They're all pretty much great athletes. It's nothing to do with whether you have the athletic ability or not. It's more when you're going into the gym session, how much are you going to apply yourself? And again, that always comes back to your mindset.
Interesting.
Good.
So yeah, going back to 2004, that was a tough year for him, Ronaldo, right? Didn't he lose the Euro to Greece in 2004 as well? And then You said he was not in his peak form, so he's gone a long way from 04.
And again, and that just shows, that's all credit to him. So it's interesting from my point of view, whenever I see, the kind of the heights he's gone to in his career, and then also the money he's earned from it. And in my opinion, I just think, good on him. He deserves every single penny he earns, because I know how hard I tried for 20 years to get to anywhere near, kind of being the top player or being an amazing player in the Premier League. And I just couldn't do it, no matter how hard I tried. And yet, he isn't just like a good player. He's not just a very good. He's not just won a couple of league titles. He's not just won a couple of champions. He's literally been the best player I've seen. And for me, the difference and why I probably respect Ronaldo more than Messi is because Ronaldo started here and got to the pinnacle just through hard work and dedication. Whereas, in my opinion, Messi was almost like when he walked into that Barcelona team at 17, he was already there as the best player in the world. Like whenever Ronaldinho's looking at Messi and going, who is this kid? He didn't look at Ronaldo whenever he was a 17, 18-year-old kid thinking he's going to be the number one.
So many great players, and you joked before and said that you had never had like a real job. But I mean, you need to invest so much in order to be a professional footballer, as yourself also for so many years. So it's hard work and dedication.
Yeah, I'm joking. I'm being very flippant about it, but it's also like a dream come true. And I know that sounds really cliche, but going back to my time when I was growing up in Belfast, I was playing football for free in the streets. I was just kicking the ball around with my friends. And then it happened to be a guy called Alan Sugar, who owned Tottenham Hotspur at the time, who then obviously gave me my first contract, my first professional contract. And it's a bit like, do you know that thing you used to do for free in the streets with your friend? Can we pay you some money to do it? And you're like, yeah, okay. And then you're like, oh, you've just made your debut in the Spurs first team in the Premier League. Can we pay you some more money? I'm like, yeah, okay. And then you move on to Norwich City and you keep going through your career and it keeps going, well. And then, of course, it gets to the other stage, Marcus, where it goes, you're not really playing very well, so we'll start taking your money down until eventually you get out the other side. But again, it's still a very, very blessed career.
I'm sure. And it's, I guess, every kid's dream who's doing sport to go to that level. So it's amazing that you went there.
Yeah.
You are also an author. You have written the book, The Stupid Footballer is Dead.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you decide to write a book, and how did this come along?
Yeah, it's such an interesting scenario, because I don't know why. And again, this probably gives you a little bit of an insight into me as a youngster, as a kid. The fact that I talk about reading a personal development book at 17, now that book was a pretty chunky book. It was probably about 500 pages in it. So when my friend gave it to me at the time, I don't know why I didn't take the book and just throw it over my shoulder and think, well, I'm not going to read that. Not only did I read it, I applied the lessons from it and then used that in my career. So what was also then, whether it's strange, weird, or normal, I don't know, but at 21, I'd already come up with the title of my book, and it's The Stupid Footballer is Dead.
All right.
Now, I don't know why that title came to my head. I know that I was definitely a little bit annoyed and frustrated with the, what do you want to call it, like the sweeping generalizations. It was just because so many people thought footballers were stupid. And in my experience, the people that I knew, it was the complete opposite. Like pretty much every footballer I know is incredibly astute, very switched on, not necessarily academically smart, but very smart in terms of people, because obviously footballers attract lots of people and you meet thousands of people every year. So you very quickly get almost your antenna is, can I trust this person? What do they want? Do they just want something from me? So I would say footballers are very switched on. It's very difficult to put wool over their eyes. But when I started reading newspapers and seeing things on the media about all the way that footballers were kind of had this reputation, I just thought, that's not who I am, and I don't think it's what footballers are. So I had that title of the book for a long time. And it was only actually when I finished playing and I decided to go down this route as being a keynote speaker. And I went off to America because I thought, if I'm going to go down this route, I'm going to invest in myself. So I invested £12,000 at the time to go to America and learn how to become a keynote speaker. And as part of the course, one of the things they suggested was it would be really helpful to write a book. And I just didn't know what I could write the book on. But once I had the title of the book, because I'd already had that for a long time, I then thought, right, what is the subject that I love the most? And it was all around psychology. So really it was me sharing the lessons, not necessarily that I should have done in football, more what I had learned as after a 20-year career, so that I can then share those with people who either want to be successful in football or in business and life.
£12,000 is a big investment to invest in your career. And also you mentioned Tony Robbins. He's also a keynote speaker. Is that someone you have looked up to and you wanted to, take learnings from?
Yeah, so that's such a fascinating story because if you try and keep up with the timeline here, in 1994, I came across from Belfast to London, joined Tottenham Hotspur. I probably would say I had an inferiority complex. My mindset wasn't conducive for being a top professional athlete. 1 year later, I was given a book by my friend who was written by Tony Robbins called Awaken the Giant Within. That book essentially changed my life. Honestly, I think it's that profound. Just completely took the blinkers off what I thought was possible, what I should be doing, and completely put me down a different path of learning, growth mindset, keep improving, keep applying goals to your life. One of the first things I did as soon as I finished playing in 2010, after we just won our second league title with Norwich City, I got on a plane to Los Angeles and went on a 4-day course with Tony Robbins. So there was like about 4,000 people in this huge convention center in LA. And I had this weekend with Tony Robbins, which I absolutely loved. Because I then at the same time was learning and wanted to go down this route of keynote speaker and mental performance and performance psychology. So I thought, right, I need to learn from the best. So I went and learned from an American speaker who was charging $10,000 an hour. And I thought, why? I'm never going to get paid, $10,000 an hour. But if I invest this £12,000 to go on this course, and even if I get paid £500 for a one-off session, like a 1 hour session, or even 1,000, I would be delighted. And I don't have to do too many of those before I'd get my money back and get my return on investment. So I went off to America at the end of 2010. And Marcus, would you believe, who did I share my beachfront apartment for that week residential in Tampa, Florida? Who did I share it with? Tony Robbins' son, Jared Robbins. It was just incredible to talk about the stars aligning and circle of life. Like, you couldn't imagine that 15 years earlier, I'd read a book by Jared's dad that changed my life. And 15 years later, when I'm in Tampa, Florida, becoming a keynote speaker, and I'm staying in the room with Jared Robbins. And as you can imagine, someone who grows up with Tony Robbins as their dad is an incredibly impressive person. And Jared's a really good friend now. And yeah, it's amazing to see how high he's gone in that world of personal development too.
Wow, that's an incredible story. And as I said, the stars aligned, and having someone that you admired from his book at an early age, and then all through your life to bring that with you, that's great.
Yeah.
So the book, how has it been received?
So it's really interesting because I probably wrote it more towards people who were probably younger players who wanted to, try and have a crack at being a professional football. Again, just because I thought that if I was younger, I would love to have read a book that would help me with my mindset and psychology. And I tried to lay out the framework of, all the things you should be working on in terms of your belief, in terms of your focus, your accountability, goal setting, visualization, all of these things. And so it's obviously it's not a bestseller up there with Harry Potter. But for me, I was very, very happy with being able to get it reprinted twice with Bloomsbury, obviously our huge publishing firm. But it's more the fact that you have the ability to share what you know in a book, be able to go, listen, if you're interested in this, this is something that might be helping. But also, this was from 11 years ago. So because I wrote this book in 2012, I feel like now when anyone reads it, it's almost like it's captured my knowledge of 20 years in football and 1 year in the corporate world. And so I'm actually just about to go and write another number of books. Now I'm going to write 3 books in the next few years.
Oh, wow.
And because they're all based on the work and the knowledge that I've done in the corporate world now. So it's all around the psychology of performance, the psychology of leadership, and the psychology of teamwork. And because this is a very different scenario after 15 years working in the corporate world, having worked with the likes of Microsoft, and Cisco, and NatWest, and Deutsche Bank, and Invesco, and all the other PwC, KPMG, and loads of other big organizations, as well as doing my masters and all these other things that I've learned over the last 15 years. I just think it'll be a very, very different book and trio of books.
Yeah, really looking forward to read them in the future. So yes, you're doing a lot: speaking, training events, accountability, executive coaching. The keynote speaker was something you said that you want to do. How do you allocate your time with these different things that you do?
Yeah, and that's probably the biggest challenge and something that's evolved the most over the last few years. And I'll be honest, Marcus, I feel like that whenever I was going down this route of being a keynote speaker from 2010 when I stopped playing, pretty much up to 2020, obviously just at the onset of COVID, I would say that if I was really honest, I would say I had probably a one-dimensional business that I was selling my time for money. And lots of people do that. They exchange their time for money. And that's the way I was doing it. And listen, you were very well paid and you get to travel the world and you go to lots of different events all over the place. So it was good fun. But of course, COVID completely knocked me and lots of people and businesses sideways. And I realized that how can I evolve my business so it's not just about me? Because if COVID happens again, I'll be in the exact same scenario if I carry on what I was doing. So what I realized is that I'm really fascinated with people who are the best in the world. And I really look up to them and I hugely admire them. And I think it's because I tried my best. Remember we mentioned about Cristiano Ronaldo, why I think he deserves all the money in the world, because it's the hardest thing to do. To score that many goals, ask any football player, it's the hardest thing to do. That's why the strikers always get the most money. So because I thought it can't be about me, I thought, right, what happens if I could create a leadership program that sort of flips the normal leadership programs on their head? Instead of the big names who deliver these kind of programs and go in and deliver the keynote at the start, and then lots of people who, aren't as high profile or as knowledgeable or experienced would go in and deliver lots of the rest of the program. And that's generally the typical format. And I thought, well, what happens if I use my network in football, rugby, sport, business, and pull together a world-class team, people who have literally been world champions or the best in their profession, and bring them together in a leadership program so that whenever we offer our programs to an organization, they can say, okay, so you're going to bring me the single best people in the world from all these different backgrounds to come and work with our senior leadership teams. And for me, that's been the biggest difference that I've found. So whenever we go in, we're bringing people who've won like Olympic gold medal, double Olympic gold medals, Rugby World Cup winners, people who've won the Champions League, people who've played in World Cup finals in football, business leaders, people who have group MDs of companies worth 40 billion, all the way through to chief technology officers and fighter jet pilots from the military, as well as clinical psychologists and even people who have climbed Everest. So it really is a fascinating and incredible assembly of expert deliverers. And so whenever we're going in and sharing this with our clients, we just seem to be getting so much traction, which is why we go back to the very start when you said, have you been busy? And it's like, yeah, it's been pretty busy. And so I'm really looking forward to this weekend to having some time off.
I'm sure. And as I said, well deserved. But it's so interesting that you started as yourself, you're selling your time, and now you are building a team in order to, maximize what it is that you offer in your engagements.
Yeah, and it's because I feel like whenever I was looking around and seeing what the competition was, there was this very simple format of unless you're a big company like, like an EY or a PwC or KPMG, where you have millions of pounds worth of resources and you have lots of all off-the-shelf programs that you can deliver and have delivered. Well, also the people who deliver them probably won't be world-class. They probably won't have won Olympic medals, or they probably won't have been fighter jet pilots in the army, or they probably haven't climbed Mount Everest. So if these organizations have all the resources, but not the experts to deliver the sessions, I thought, well, how can someone like myself compete with these huge multinational organizations? And that's where it's really about the people. Because I'm very fortunate with my network in sport, but because this 15-year career I've had after my playing days, I've just built up enough people where whenever you do speak to the best people in the world in the corporate side, they think very similarly to the professional footballers and the world-class players I played with and against. So that's really, it's how do you bring this into an organization so that you can then filter this down through the rest of the people, which of course is the biggest challenge. Every board, every senior leadership team, all they're really trying to do is influence and make their people more productive, more efficient. So ultimately they can drive more money.
You have said that you have dedicated your career to understanding what makes humans tick. Would you say that that differs if you give a speaking engagement to a corporate company versus a football club, for example, the players versus the employees? Are there different things that makes these people tick?
No, I think it's the exact same things that make people tick, just in a different environment. I also believe that the only reason why I think like this is because I was exposed to a world-class environment and to world-class people and to world champions. And ultimately, I think that's the difference. If you go in and speak to football players or Premier League players, most of them will understand what elite performance is, what world class is, because they've either played with them, played against them, played under them in terms of the coaches. So even like someone like a player at Man City coming in and learning from Pep Guardiola, they will know what world class is because Guardiola has been pretty much the best manager around for the last 10 years. So whenever you understand in football what world class is, that's great. And that's what I got on my first day at Tottenham Hotspur in 1994. Like my first training session was with Jurgen Klinsmann, the German international who'd already won the World Cup, who was already a huge global superstar. And I started training with him. And then, of course, our manager at the time was a World Cup winner, Ozzy Ardiles with Argentina. So the only example I can try and give you and try and bring it from what a sporting analogy like that would be in the corporate world is if you are, let's say, a grad, you've just finished university, you might be 21, 22, and you walk into your new job at a big organization and you don't go and sit in a little desk in the corner somewhere out of the way. You walk straight into the boardroom and you sit in the boardroom for the next 15, 20 years and you understand what people in the boardroom, how they think, how they act, how they behave, what they think's normal. And if you're around that every single day for 20 years, I'm telling you, your mindset will be very different. So when you do go into the likes of these corporate organizations that I'm speaking with, I'm going in and sharing this world-class experience of world-class people in a world-class environment and bringing it across and saying, you maybe have never come across this before, but let me share you my experience and see if you can apply some of this to your role. But as you said, to answer the question, what makes people tick? It's always our choice drivers of what we want in life. But Marcus, that's a pretty big question because what you're then assuming is that people know what they want in life. And in my experience, most have no idea. And that's a big statement in itself for me that I think most people have no idea. Because, give you a quick example. If I'm in delivering a session, and just as a simple way to highlight this, I'll just say to, let's say, 100 people in the room. Doesn't matter whether they're CEOs, directors, salespeople, nurses, teachers, doesn't matter. And I say, hands up if you have goals or targets for the workplace. 100% of people, is that too many people walking into their work every day and just have nothing to do and, targets or goals or objectives, KPIs, OKRs, etc. And I'm okay, brilliant, hands down. And you ask this question, okay, how many people have well thought out, well constructed, well considered, and this is probably the key, Marcus, written down goals or targets for their personal life? What percentage on average do you think normally put their hands up out of 100 people?
5.
3 to 5. 5 is a maximum, but say I'd probably at the most I've seen, but it's definitely, sometimes it's none. Occasionally there'll be a couple, normally about 3%, very, very rarely, maybe 5 people in a room. And you think, these people are generally very successful in life. They probably have nice jobs, or let's say good jobs, earn good money, live in nice houses, drive nice cars. And you're going, do you know what you want in life? What are you working towards in life? Or a better question might be, what does success look like for you? The amount of people who can't answer that question, that is incredible.
Yes, but there I feel like there must be a difference with elite athletes. If you say, what does success looks to you? They say it's to be the best in the world, to win the cup, to make the national team, to score the most goals. It feels like the goal setting is clearer on the athlete side than in the corporate world.
Well, I would say they both have the same. If you're talking about a professional athlete in their career, as in their professional career, and if you say like an executive director in their professional career, I'd say they're both equally focused and equally clear of what they want. I would take both of those people in that sporting world and corporate world and put them into their personal life. I would say the athlete would probably have less idea and less clarity on what they want in their personal life, not their career, in their personal life. And I would say the director or the senior person would have less clarity about what they want in their personal life. And that's what makes it really interesting. So to give you an example, because this has been it's almost like a part of my DNA now, I've obviously conditioned my mind to constantly be goal setting, to constantly work on things, to constantly be looking ahead. So the reason why at 16, 17, I was setting goals for me as a 21-year-old, 25, 28, 32, and when I was going to retire from professional football. And it was a simple thing that I had set a goal for is I wanted to retire injury-free. Because I would see players like, I don't know if you remember, Gary Mabbutt used to be our club captain at Tottenham Hotspur. He lifted the FA Cup for Spurs in 1991, but just an incredible player. Played about 600-700 games for Spurs in the 80s and 90s. But he'd played so much, he'd put his body through so much that just to get him out to training, he used to have to bandage him up and fill him with tablets and strap him and everything just to get him out to training. And I used to look at him as a 35, 36-year-old guy, and he was like really battered and broken almost. And I thought, I never want to be like that. So for me, as a 16, 17-year-old, I'd set a goal that I want to leave football injury-free. So how does that happen? Well, for me, one of the first things I started doing was I started doing yoga at 17. And because I'd been doing yoga all the way through my career, at 32, I don't know if it's a coincidence, Marcus, or not, but I left football 100% injury-free. Even now as a 45-year-old guy, I'm 100% injury-free. Is that because I did the yoga and still the yoga? Might be, might not be. But also the statistic of I only had one muscle injury during a 20-year playing career. I had lots of injuries of people picking me and chopping me down. Nothing I can do about that, but one muscle injury. So when I think about it, the goal setting that I've applied to myself over all of these years doesn't happen by accident. It happens because as a professional athlete, I had goals of what I wanted. But of course, I then had a goal when I came out of professional football to be a keynote speaker. Now, I haven't got to $10,000 an hour yet. I'm over 50% of the way, but I still haven't got to my goal. But this is the point, is that I'm still working on goals for me. So actually coming out of professional football, my next goal was, I want to be a successful businessman. I want to have a career, an entrepreneur. I want to write a book. I want to jump out of a plane. All these goals that I was setting for myself were all things to do with me and my career across lots of areas of my life. But I also wanted balance, because as a professional athlete, you just have simply no balance, because it's pretty much everything needs to go into you being the best performer. So having balance was my single biggest goal as I came out of professional football. And I did that for a long, long time. And I'm now 45. And my goal isn't to have balance anymore, because I feel like I've achieved that. So the next stage now for me is all about progression. So if I was to share what my goal is now, it's just how do I keep progressing in every way, as a career, as an individual, in a health and fitness perspective, financially, for my family and friends. What am I doing that I'm going to keep progressing and growing and learning in my life? So there's 3 distinct goals that I've had. And of course, as I get older, it'll then soon be health and fit and healthy all the way until I'm old and grey in my 70s and 80s and 90s. So, but you can see how this is the goals that I've set for myself. But when you ask other people outside of their work, what kind of goals do you have? Lots of people struggle.
Good point, and very interesting. And what a smart 17-year-old you must have been. You said you picked up the self-help book. You you planned out your career. You did yoga. Yeah. You did everything like from an early age. I mean, you were a teenager.
Yeah, I think it's weird. I don't know any other way to describe it. I just think I must have been a bit weird. Or maybe it's not weird. Maybe it's just different. But actually, and again, I'm joking because I don't think I was doing anything different. All I was doing was just, following and navigating the path through the challenges of trying to be a young professional footballer. But if I were to try and think of a reason why, so you might say it's smart, but, I left school academically. I did okay. I was never, nowhere near the top 3As, 3Bs, 3Cs from when I left school. So it's clearly wasn't the best student. But I think probably one of my best assets that I have as an individual is learning from people and learning from my environment. So that was probably one of the reasons why I started doing these things. But also, when I was younger, my dad had this just real curiosity about knowledge and information and learning things. And clearly through just being around him, he's still the same now. He still, has got this real curiosity about, space and the universe and all these different things that he's fascinated about. So I remember whenever we were younger, he'd like just pick a book up off the shelf and start reading it at the kitchen table. They'd be, oh, Paul, come on, look at this. Look at, can you believe how, look at the distance to the moon. Look at, whatever it was he was talking about. So I could clearly see the passion that he had. And clearly was starting to, drip into me. And maybe that's why I got this curiosity about learning and knowledge. But that was only just for me to pick up the book and start reading and go, oh, why not? But then I had the same conversation with my mum whenever she said, have you ever thought about doing yoga? And I thought, no, never really thought about it. She said, well, it's really good for your flexibility and reducing injuries and core strength and all these things. So I thought, okay. So clearly, I think I was open-minded. So I would actually say more, I was open-minded as opposed to smart. But ultimately, you can only join the dots whenever you look back. I could never have done this whenever I was at the 17-year-old looking forward, thinking, I'm going to start yoga because this is going to make me injury-free. I can only do that 15 years after it stopped playing.
That's true. Connecting the dots, going backwards, looking back at your career, both as a player and keynote speaker and sports psychologist, has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
How long have you got? You've got about 4 days to go through this. Oh, Marcus, it's almost on a daily basis. Like, I don't think that's hyperbole or I'm not exaggerating when I say it's on a daily basis in football and in the career that I have now. For example, whenever I was 16, I turned up as it's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but like a prepubescent teenage boy. I was always the smallest in the team, 5'6". I hadn't matured, I hadn't developed, and I'm playing against these guys who were almost like men, hairs on their chest and been shaven for 4 years by the time they were 16, 17. And I'm playing against these guys who were just bigger, stronger, faster, more intelligent on the beat, everything that I wasn't. So the first 2 years were horrendous as a young player because I couldn't compete physically. Also, I didn't realize, but I had an issue with my nose, that I had actually a deviated septum, which just means the middle of my nose was slightly off center, which meant probably the reason why I look the way I do, but it was also just because it stopped the airflow, which meant I didn't breathe efficiently. And I was only at 18 whenever the doctor saw I had some sort of issue, picked it up, had an operation on my nose at 18. They straightened it, they cleared everything out. And so I went from, as a 16 to 18-year-old, being in the bottom 3 in the running sessions, when you're doing 18-yard back, 6-yard back, halfway, all those different running sessions you do. I went from being in the bottom 3, had the operation at 18, the same summer that I was turning professional at Tottenham Hotspur, and I came back for pre-season training, and I was then in the top 3. So just that difference in athleticism, but for 2 years, struggling knowing you're the unfittest, the worst runner, the worst athlete, trying to compete against these guys, all the way through to making your debut in the Premier League, playing against these guys, going, how can I play against? They're just so good, so big. More tough times, more challenges. Fast forward 5 years later, we're in Norwich City, and we got, promoted back into the Premier League. Then one of our first games was against Arsenal, the Invincibles, and you're playing against Thierry Henry, Dennis Bergkamp, Patrick Vieira, Sol Campbell, Jens Lehmann, and it's like, how do you compete with these guys? It was literally like men against boys, all the way through to once you get to the end of your career. And again, it's back to the athleticism. I just couldn't keep up with these guys who were getting younger, fitter, stronger, and I'm getting older, slower, fatter. All the way through to moving through the transition, which, as much as it looks seamless now, it was tough at the time because I came out of a 20-year career and thinking, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And it was only because, as I said, Gavin Drake, our sports psychologist at the time, helped me transition. So again, helping with those unknowns all the way through to what I've been doing now and learning how to become a keynote speaker, learning how to run a business, learning how to run a team, and then even something like dealing with COVID, where I would say it was definitely the toughest 3 years of my life from 2020 up to the start of this year, just because COVID completely changed everything in the corporate world. So we're all learning and we're all trying to keep up with the new ways that people work, and of course, still trying to stay ahead of the curve. So you're still trying to do as much as you can, given all of the challenging circumstances. So it's really interesting when you do things like this, it highlights all of the things that have gone well. Playing in the Premier League, winning league titles, winning the trophy at Wembley, playing internationally, becoming a keynote speaker, working for all these organizations. But the other side of that is, I was released from every club I ever played for. No manager ever paid £1 for me. That's also the reality. So then it depends on what you want to focus on, all of the good stuff and achievements, or all the bad stuff and the resilience that you learn from it.
And I guess that you do the latter.
Well, I like to do both, because also if I'm always focusing on all the stuff that went wrong, then I probably wouldn't leave the house and probably wouldn't leave my bedroom, stick putting the covers back over your head, not get out of bed in the morning. But it's to do with the fact that you need to understand that life is always this kind of, sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. But ultimately, for me, back to what my overall goal is at this stage of life, it's just about progression and moving forward.
For sure. Is there something that I haven't asked you yet that you feel is important to mention?
I think the biggest thing that I've seen in people, and obviously there's lots of questions that could be appropriate right now, but I'd say the biggest thing in people is around belief in themselves. And the reason why I think it's so important is because we place such limiting beliefs on what we think we're capable of. And that's in probably every area of our life. So as a 17-year-old kid, or let's say as a 16-year-old kid, I, for whatever reason, created a limiting belief that I did not believe it was possible for me to be a professional footballer. So as a 16-year-old kid, I was already at Tottenham Hotspur, and because I just trained with Jurgen Klinsmann on my first day, and I really looked at him and thought, if that's what it takes to be a professional footballer, a Premier League player, an international footballer, there is no way in the world I will ever be able to do that. That's not my teammates or coaches or family or anyone else. That's just me. It's happening in my head. So then that's the first thing, that only whenever I saw one of our teammates make his debut against Manchester United a couple of years later, that I change and break through that limiting belief, all the way through to, we used to have things not said directly to us, but more the common language that was used in the change room and in the training ground, especially at places like Spurs, where things like, I remember Teddy Sheringham said to me one time, I think I was 17, 18 maybe at the time, and he just said, Paul, wee man, play as long as you can. Playing days are the best days of your life. You'll miss it when you're gone. You'll be a long time retired. But even that is an incredibly limiting belief, because if I did believe that the playing days are the best days of my life, well, how long am I going to play for? If I get to 28, that's good. Get to 30, 32, even 35 when you're officially retired, supposed to retire. I'm still a really young man in the sort of bigger picture. And what that means essentially is that by 35, and if you do manage to make it to 60, 70, 80 or 90, pretty much the next 60 years are going to be awful, or not as good as the first 15, 20 years in football. So those kind of things were just a limiting belief that I didn't want to adopt for myself. So breaking through that barrier, that actually, no, the best days of your life aren't in football. I'd actually believe that the best decision I ever made was stepping away from football, because it was my decision to stop playing. So all of these things, all the way through to, I had a limiting belief that I never thought I would ever earn as much money as when I played in the Premier League. Well, that's not true. So because I've just proved it over the last number of years of the work that we're doing, the leadership programs that we do, etc., it completely blows out of the water all of these limiting beliefs that I've had about myself. And I feel it's the same with lots of people, where we just don't necessarily believe in ourselves, not because other people are telling us, more because we don't really believe enough in ourselves.
Very interesting. and so many learnings to take from this hour or so that we have spoken. I really appreciate that you took the time. Before I let you go, the last question that I ask everyone is, if you could choose the next guest on this podcast, who do you think that I should talk to?
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. Well, I would say there is a guy called Leon Lloyd who also had a similar background to me. Wasn't in football, but it was in rugby. And Leon played in probably the most successful rugby union team, club rugby union team, because he played for Leicester Tigers, and his captain was Martin Johnson, who won the World Cup with England in 2003. So Leon won 2 European Cups. I think it was like 5 Premiership titles, and an amazing, amazing guy, because he played in that incredible team, but he also has gone on and he's done something very similar to himself, where he's become a keynote speaker. He also did his degree, and then he did his MBA, and now he's currently doing his PhD, as well as he started a charity. He works in lots of different businesses. He's on lots of boards. So really, really impressive guy. So I would say, if you were going to get anybody on your next podcast, I'd go for Leon Lloyd.
That sounds very interesting. Paul McVeigh, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Sports Management Podcast.
Pleasure, Marcus. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.